Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. And thank you for coming back. I wasn't sure if we were going to take a break and everybody wanted to meet the new president and all that, so it's quite the full house. So I appreciate you coming back. A very wise philosopher once said, and I don't know if this is an exact translation, but it goes somewhere along the lines of the human brain can absorb only as much as the human thumbs can endure. I believe that was a famous saying. So I want to give you a chance to get up and stretch a little bit, and hopefully you have the opportunity to do that. Before we begin, I want to give you a warning, because what stands before you today is a geek. Okay, and I realize for a keynote speaker, I'm just a tad casually, but you need to understand, for me to be wearing a shirt with buttons is already quite the big deal. So I got to wear my big boy clothes today, so I'm really excited to be here. But I am a geek. I'm not an academic. I have been working in higher education technology for 25 years now, and I have a real passion for trying to keep up on what are these technology trends, what are the drivers, how is technology shaping culture, and how is culture shaping technology. And so my insights to you are coming from that perspective, and I'm also very interested to hear what you folks have to say about this. So I'm also a blogger, so if any of you are interested, you can go to digitaledu.blogspot.com. I'm a bit of an intermittent blogger. I don't do it all that often. I do it off and on amidst everything else I have going on. But if you're interested in this space, in this intersection of technology and education, then if I stumble across an interesting site or a new type of technology I think might be of interest to faculty, I post that out there. So you're welcome to go do that. If you believe this is just a cheap trick to try to artificially inflate my hit count on my blog, well, yeah, pretty much. So while you're there, if you could hit refresh a few times, that would be great as well. So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about technology. That's the stuff that I get excited about. By the way, how many other geeks do we have in the audience? We have? I'm among some of my people. That's fantastic. That's really good. If I'm around too many carbon-based life forms, I start to get a little twitchy. So it's good to bring some other geeks in the audience. So we're going to talk about technology. We're going to talk about the impact technology has had on people. And specifically, how do we apply that to higher education? But before that, we're going to do kind of a deep dive into the music industry. And we're going to see if there are any lessons there for us on how technology has impacted and shaped that particular industry. So let's talk a little bit about technology first. I graduated from college in December of 1984. My first job was as a computer programmer for a mortgage company. And we used a PDP-11 from Digital Equipment Corporation, a company that no longer exists. They got bought out several times and pretty much faded away. I originally programmed on a PDP-11 mini computer, had a 16 megahertz processor, and count them, 4 megabytes of memory. Who would ever need more than that, right? It was the RISC-C operating system. I remember being so excited when we upgraded the RISC-C operating system, and the programs that I was writing could go from 32K all the way up to 64K. That gave me so much freedom to do so much more than what I was able to do before. We ran the entire company of about, I think it was about 150 to 200 employees. We processed millions upon millions of dollars of mortgages through that system every single day. This is the iPhone 4 that I carry around in my pocket. 1 gigahertz processor. This isn't the latest. This isn't the iPhone 4S. I've been holding out waiting for the iPhone 5. Hopefully September 12th it's going to be released. That's the word on the street. 32 gigabytes of memory, right? To do what? Play Angry Birds, right? And I'm on AT&T, so it's not even a very good phone. Which is great because I don't really like to talk to people. So that's one of the advantages, by the way. Here's a little tip for the geeks in the audience. Make sure you're with AT&T, because you can just hang up and people think the call got dropped. It's actually pretty handy. So look at the space in my career of how much technology has changed. Look at that percentage increase from a mini computer that filled a computer room, that ran an entire company, to this little mini computer now that we carry around in our pocket. It's absolutely phenomenal. And it is not slowing down at all. It is just continuously increasing. But what's interesting isn't the technology, but what that technology allows us to do with the reach of it. It used to be back in the PDP-11 days, it was just geeks like me that could really take advantage of this technology. as this has expanded out, as we've had this exponential growth in the power of the processing and the ease of the user interface, we're starting to see a phenomenal reach out into the normal world where you real people live. So let's take a look at this. We're going to look at a few devices and look at the time it took them to reach a sale of 3 million units. Okay, the original iPod took 2.5 years to get to that point where they sold their 3 millionth iPod. The Kindle took 2 years to get to that place. The original iPad, the iPad 1, took 80 days to get there. The iPhone 4 took 3 weeks to sell 3 million. The iPhone 4S took 3 days to sell 3 million units. It's absolutely phenomenal. And that gets that easy to use, simple technology out into the hands of regular people, which means things start to change. It starts to change the way you operate, the way you work. And as a result then, as more and more people start to use it, you have an influence on the technology. So it's this really interesting, kind of a yin-yang sort of thing, where there's this relationship going back and forth. This is Eric Schmidt. He used to be the CEO. He's now the chairman of Google. And he had a really interesting statement he made in an interview I read the other day. He said, from the time civilization started up until 2003, right about 2003, there was a total of about 5 exabytes of information that was produced. Since that time, that amount of information is created every 2 days. Now, I would explain how much 5 exabytes was if I knew. I have no idea, but it sounds like a lot, right? That is an enormous amount of information. So from the dawn of civilization, from the time we actually started to record thought into language, and recorded language chiseled onto stone or painted on cave walls or written on papyrus, up to 2003, that would fill 5 exabytes. Now, with the dawn of this type of technology, now that same quantity of data is produced every 2 days. We're not necessarily talking the same quality of data, obviously. We're going to be talking about that quite a bit today as well. Here's some really interesting statistics about Facebook, right? Facebook now has more than 955 million users. They project in the next year or two, it's going to reach 1 billion people using this one service. 1 out of every 4 page views in the US comes to Facebook. Take a look at that. People spend 23 billion minutes every single day on Facebook. 23 billion minutes. Now, is that necessarily the best use of our time? Again, many of these things I'm saying to you aren't necessarily things that I think are good, but these are things that are really happening. Now, as a technologist, when I build websites, one of the things I really want is I want people to come and use that, right? So I see something like this, and I can't help but ask the question, why? What is it about Facebook that is so compelling that it draws so many people to what is an entirely optional service? Sure, it's no charge, but what is it that keeps drawing people in? And I got some insights into this from 2 places. One is this map. It's actually not a map. This was done by an intern at Google in their database area who went through and created a dot for the geographic location of every user on Facebook, and then drew a line from that dot to all of that person's friends on Facebook, and so on. And isn't that fascinating that it winds up drawing a map of the world? But really, these are just a whole series of dots that represent people inside of Facebook that have connections to other people. And I think it's that connection that's the key. And I got this insight through a rather unfortunate experience that I encountered about 1.5 years ago. I got pretty sick. I originally came down with the flu. It became a pretty severe case of double pneumonia. I was hospitalized, and while I was in the hospital, my body had an extremely rare reaction to the strain of pneumonia that I had. And it triggered a reaction in my immune system where my immune system actually started to attack my own body, and I started killing off my own red blood cells. A typical adult male has a hemoglobin count of somewhere between, I think it's 11 and 13. I don't know if there's any nursing instructors here, but somewhere in there. Anything below that range is considered anemic. Anything below 10 is considered highly dangerous. Mine dropped down to 5.8. I was moved into the ICU. I wound up spending overall about 3 weeks in the hospital, and I was off work for about 2.5 months. But there's a fascinating thing that happened while I was going through that. It was actually one of the most profound times in my life. If you ever want to truly get 100% clarity on what is important in life, I highly recommend being in a position where you're wondering if you're going to live. It is amazing the clarity that comes to you in that moment. While I was laying in that hospital bed with my wife and my kids there, I never once thought about work, by the way. As important as our jobs are, as important as what we do in higher education, since that time I have rather radically cut back the number of hours I put in at work, and that's been a healthy thing for me. But what was really interesting about that, I'm a geek, so by nature I generally don't like people. You know, no offense to anybody in this room, I just don't like people, right? I'd much rather be sitting at my computer, doing stuff, because that's a nice safe place. I get out here, I talk to carbon votes, life forms, it gets all messy, right? So that's just my general rule. But what was interesting is, during a couple times during my hospitalization, I was put into isolation, both to protect me and at one point they didn't know what was going on with me. At one point my body had this really weird reaction where blisters started breaking out on my face. My whole body got this really bizarre rash, and I can see a number of you covering your mouths right now. Maybe I should step back a little bit, but don't worry, I'm fine. I'm fine now. I'm good, so you don't have anything to worry about. But as you can imagine, when you're in that kind of a condition and everybody who comes into your room has to wear a gown, gloves, and a mask, there's not a lot of cuddling going on in that kind of space, right? My wife and kids would kind of, walk in the door and kind of press themselves up against the wall. So how are you feeling? You okay? So there's this really sense of isolation with that. A couple days into my hospitalization, my daughter went on my laptop where I stayed logged into Facebook, and she just typed, hey, my dad's really sick, he's in the hospital, can you be praying for him? And then my wife wouldn't bring my laptop to my hotel room because she was my hospital room. That would have been nice, right? A little more expensive than a hotel room. Wouldn't bring the laptop to my hospital room because she was afraid I was going to start working, but she did bring my iPhone. And I was able to go onto Facebook, and I started to see these messages start popping into my newsfeed from an old high school friend that I hadn't seen for 30 years, from a friend that had moved to Ireland, and another one that lived in India. People from my church, people from my youth group when I was in college friends, just these little comments going, hey Jim, we're with you, we're praying for you, is there anything we can do? It was amazing the level of support that I could feel in this incredibly isolated environment because of those connections. So I got it a little more about what Facebook is all about, and people like me that build that technology need to remember that it's not about the technology, it's about what the technology enables. And we need to remember that when we're talking about things like distance education. We can have the most sophisticated technology in the world, it really doesn't mean anything. It's a conduit for that connection between you and your students. And that's where our emphasis really needs to be. Again, remember I'm saying that as a technology. So back to technology, some other YouTube stats. Here's one interesting. More video is uploaded to YouTube in 60 days than all 3 major US networks created in 60 years. Isn't that amazing? Now, admittedly, a vast majority is videos of people's cats. So we're not necessarily talking about really high-quality video, but of course, given what's on the 3 major networks, maybe it's not that much of a comparison to what's going on out there. Recommendation engines. These are real subtle things that work under the hood, but that make your online experience so much more better, so much more better. Okay, I said I wasn't an academic, right? So now you know. So much better. And you may not even be aware of them. How many of you, the second time you went into Amazon, were a little surprised when it came back and said, well, welcome, Jim. We think you might be interested in these books, right? Amazon was one of the first ones to start doing that. Now everybody does that. It's fascinating. Now, it doesn't fool us, right? I don't think there's a bunch of people sitting in a conference room at Amazon headquarters saying, well, let's talk about Jim Gaston now. You know, what books do you think he'd be interested in, right? So we know there's algorithms and there's things, but it just makes it so much more personalized. It makes it so much more interesting. Google does this, Netflix does this, Apple, just about every site does this. In our district, we're working on a project right now called Sherpa that I'm really excited about, that essentially wants to bring this attitude toward the educational experience. So when a student logs into our portal, they should see things that are customized specifically for them. When they go into registration, they shouldn't be treated just like anybody else, because a student coming to us right out of high school that wants to transfer to UC Berkeley has very different needs than an older student who's just coming here to take some art classes, right? But we treat them exactly the same. They don't get that anywhere else. Everywhere else they go, the site customizes itself to them. So we're working on Sherpa to give our students a really personalized, unique online experience, and we've built it in such a way that we believe it can be used by other institutions. And we're in some really serious discussions with some software companies and the State Chancellor's Office that we're really hoping that not just our 43,000 students would be able to use this software, that potentially students all across the state. So stay tuned for that. We're really hoping we're going to be able to make that happen. So that's some background on technology. A lot of that you already know, some geeky stuff, right? Now let's get to what most of you are really interested in. What's the impact on people? The technology, as I talked about, because we've had this exponential growth in both raw processing power and memory, and what that leads to is something that has just a much easier to use interface. It's not the old days of the DOS prompt. How many people ever did a DOS prompt or had a, oh, see, wow, quite a number of you, awesome, right? How many of you have done that recently? Right? Few of you, not all that many. Why? Because the interfaces are so much easier to use. Well, that winds up transforming entire industries. Let's take a look at some of them. The book industry. Amazon now sells more electronic versions of books than they do paper books. Again, I'm not saying all this is good. I love books. I love the smell of books. I love the feel of them. Paper is actually an amazing technology, right? The battery never goes out. I can read it in direct sunlight. I can drop it. I can spill things on it, and it continues to function. It's amazing technology, right? Now, it doesn't scale all that well, right? And there is some destruction that goes on with the environment that we want to be careful about. So e-readers can really have their place. I don't want books to go completely away, but there's some amazing things you can do with e-books, particularly with textbooks. And there's an enormous amount of momentum coming in now. The textbook industry is finally wising up that they just cannot continue to charge the prices they are for textbooks, and they're starting to shift over to the electronic books, which is going to lead to you having much more flexibility. Instead of just saying, I want that book, but you really only like 4 of those chapters, right? So you're going to be able to pick and choose among different publishers, add your own content, and just crank that out as a textbook that students could actually print and have shipped to their home or access electronically. It's happening now, and even more is right around the corner. Look at what's happened to newspapers and magazines. There's not a newspaper in this country that's not struggling right now. I was a subscriber to Newsweek magazine for over 20 years. I finally let my subscription lapse because it was a pamphlet. It wasn't even a magazine anymore. It was like this thin, right? There was like nothing to it. And they sold Newsweek magazine, you know what they sold it for? $1. $1. That's all somebody would pay for Newsweek magazine. There's a newspaper or magazine in the country that is struggling, and why is that? Because we've got these aggregators out there that are going out and grabbing content from other sites and pulling them into one location. 2 of them out here. Notice Huffington Post on the left, Drudge Report on the right. So I'm trying to cover both ends of the political spectrum here. But those are just 2 examples of sites out there that go grab content from other places and have it out there for free, right? And it's absolutely up to date. As soon as I print something, it has the potential for getting out of sync. So the newspaper and magazine industry. The travel industry. When's the last time you went to a travel agent, right? To make arrangements for a trip. Now you can just go online to any number of sites. Expedia and Travelocity is 2 of them, and make all those arrangements. It automatically searches behind the scenes, finds me the best deals for hotels, finds me the best deals for airlines. All that is handled for me. It's eliminating that intermediary that's a person and providing direct service to the consumer. Reference books. Here's another example of one. When's the last time people purchased encyclopedias? Right? Encyclopedia Britannica just announced they're going to stop publishing books. It's just not worth it. No one's buying them. When I can go online, and what's really interesting is a site like Wikipedia the content is actually produced by the users. It was really radical when Wikipedia originally came out. Now I've seen studies that talk about the accuracy of this, and I've seen studies that say it doesn't compare, and I've seen other studies that say it's actually pretty close to the error rate you would see in a regular encyclopedia. I remember reading a newspaper article a while back where a reporter went in and purposely inserted an error into an article and then timed it and waited to see how quickly that error would be fixed by one of the people who monitored those pages. And it was actually pretty stunning. I don't forget the time frame. I don't remember the time frame. But it was somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes before that error was corrected inside of Wikipedia. And so what's happened now is this enabling technology isn't just getting the content out to individuals in ways that's easy and intuitive, but it's actually reversing the producer-consumer model. And so now the consumers of the product can actually turn around and become producers into it as well. And we're seeing that more and more. Wikipedia was one of the first. Movies, Netflix. What happened to Blockbuster? Final chapter 11. Why? Because Netflix came along, made it simpler and easier. What's Netflix doing now? They're getting rid of sending DVDs to your home, of having this physical content that comes to you, and as the bandwidth in your home increases more and more, everything's moving toward streaming. And as people start getting entertainment centers in their homes that have big screen TVs and surround sound, the movie industry and the theaters is starting to get hit. If you've seen a movie recently, they're starting to fight back. Have you seen that trailer they show at the beginning now? Where they show this big screen and this explosion, all this fancy sound, and the picture starts shrinking down smaller and smaller, and they purposely start making the sound tinier and tinier. And they say, why would you watch a movie on something this big when you can see it on this big? Well, I don't think they've seen some of the surround sound systems. It actually sounds pretty darn good, and it's nice and convenient, and I can stop it if I have the phone rings or after I go to the bathroom. And so they've got a bit of a battle on their hands there. Television is completely changing too. How many of you now have a DVR? Right? Just about everybody. How many of you, once using a DVR, would ever go back to watching TV without it? That's one of those disruptive innovations that comes along. That now I don't have to sit there and figure out how to program a VCR, right? Which could be cumbersome for some folks. And I'm not tied to the schedule of the producer of the material. I now have the flexibility to watch things when I want to watch. It's putting the user in control. And now we're seeing that even more with on-demand, with services like Hulu and YouTube, where really professionally produced content is starting to appear in there. And we're seeing amateurs who produce content has caught the eye of producers. And some of these people, comedians that produce their own YouTube videos, are now actually appearing and getting professional contracts. Believe it or not, that's actually how Justin Bieber's career started. So again, it's not all good that these things are happening, but he actually got his start by producing videos on YouTube. Software, the same thing is happening. Those of us that are geeks are not immune to this thing that we are unleashing upon the rest of the world. The Apple App Store has broken down that barrier that it would take for me to write some software that I think you might be interested in. But now I don't have to go through this whole publishing cycle and get a company behind me. I can write a quick little app, throw it up onto the App Store. You can take a look at it. Yeah, 99 cents. What the heck? Click on that, downloads, and if you like it, great. If not, well, I'm in blue apply, right? It's completely starting to transform the software industry and the way things work. We're going to start moving away from these giant bloated systems like Microsoft Word and Excel and things like that, where you may use maybe 3 to 4% of the features of a software product like that, but it's taking up this huge amount of space. We're either going to have little apps, or we're going to have cloud-based services like Zoho and services like that. Communication, we've already talked about that quite a bit with text messaging. Isn't it just unbelievable? And I know you guys probably struggle with this with the students in your classroom. I can remember times where my son and daughter were texting each other, sitting in the same room at home. And I said, you know, if you spoke out loud right now, he would hear what you were typing on there. Of course, they were probably saying something about me. That actually just dawned on me. I probably should have figured that out. But between texting and Facebook, we know that this generation of college students rarely check their email. Well, why should they, right? Anything important is going to come right down to texting. And so that's another thing that we need to be aware of as one of the trends out there. And in the music industry, and this is where we're going to start drilling down into some more detail in just a minute. So what are some of the common threads between these transformations? Because these transformations are serious. They have serious impacts on the people that are behind these industries. It has changed jobs, it has put people out of work, it has created entire new industries, created an entire new stream of jobs that are available out there. It has radically transformed these industries. A change in the producer-consumer model, I talked about that. We aren't just passive consumers now, we can actually be involved in that. Decentralized control, a greatly reduced cost to the users, and a very participatory process, which if the site is customized in such a way and built in a really smart way, it can create a really motivated and engaged user community. So let's talk for a minute now about the music industry. We kind of went at the 30,000 level view of a bunch of industries. Let's drill down a little deeper. And for many of us here, I look around the room, I'm not the only one in the room with some gray hair. So I suspect that some of us are going to be walking through memory lane here in just a second. We're going to take a look at the music industry. Thomas Edison started the music industry. He had this idea of how to capture sound. Because the physics behind it is, as I'm talking, I'm pushing air up out of my now healthy lungs, thankfully. They're going through my vocal cords that are vibrating. And that's creating these sound waves that are going out into the audience that you can't see, but they're these pressure waves that are going out. Inside your ear is a little drum. The pressure waves vibrate that drum, that then go through this really cool little bone structure in your ear, create electrical signals that your brain then interprets as noise. And it could be music, it could be the sound of a car crash, could be a siren, could be a voice, and so we encode all of that sound with meaning inside of our brain. Well, Thomas Edison was the very first one that said, if I could capture those waves and replay them, then I could actually capture sound. Really simple idea, right? He came up with this idea, he got a group of his people in his lab together, built a prototype. The prototype worked the very first time. He recorded Mary Had a Little Lamb. He had this big drum, he spoke into this big tube, the drum vibrated, it moved a stylus that went around this hand-cranked tube with wax on it. And the stylus actually carved out the sound waves into the wax. And then he just reversed the process. Pretty amazing, huh? He was the first one to actually come up with this idea. He never really made any money off it. He tried to commercialize it. Great inventor, not always the best businessman. He did a number of other things, electricity. He was really a pretty brilliant guy. But what came along was the Victrola. And that was the first real consumer product that actually took that same idea, put it onto a disc rather than a tube, and that was the first one that was actually used in the home. Which led in the 1920s to, and this is where we start going down memory lane. Many of you probably remember, like I do, our teenage years. And I love doing this presentation when there are younger people in the room, because in about 5 minutes they start to look at me like I'm a total dinosaur, right? So, remember the vinyl discs? Now these started to make a comeback not that long ago, but do you remember these? I can remember these when I was in high school. Because what we do is, and for the younger people in the room, this is where LP came from. It's actually vinyl. It has these grooves in it. You put it on this turntable, it would spin around. What do? We grab that little arm with a little tiny needle, right? And you have to try to get it to line up just right, and invariably you miss, and then if you scratch it, the record is ruined. And I remember one of my brothers got an automated turntable. You could actually put multiple records on at one time. They would drop down, the little arm would swing over and drop in the perfect spot. And it was just like, that's amazing technology! It's like magic! How did we do that? Right? We were just so excited about that. So there are some cool things about this compared to what they had before. But obviously some downsides to it. It's a package deal. What if I only like this song, right? And if I was really interested in listening to this, I probably shouldn't be touching it the way I am right now too, right? Because that's pretty much going to ruin it. This is actually my daughter's album. She kind of started to get into vinyl records a while back. So that worked for quite some time. And then what happened is we had reel-to-reel tape recorders. Remember this? And music would be played on this. I remember my brothers and my dad had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. And what was really exciting about this is the first time of the producer-consumer switching happened. Because now we could actually record onto this. And so we'd record skits and things that we just thought were absolutely hysterical, right? But you couldn't fast forward to a specific spot very easily. You could fast forward, but you have to keep guessing and go back and forth a bit. Over time, the tape would stretch, and so the quality would degrade pretty quickly. So it never really caught on too much in the music industry. But then, oh yeah, I can tell there's some children of the 60s in this room. The 8-track tape player. This is ABBA, by the way. It's very difficult to find an 8-track tape. I remember putting an 8-track tape player in my mom's 64 Ford station wagon. And let me tell you, that was pretty cool. You know, so my friends and I could listen to Bachman Turner Overdrive on these really teeny little speakers in my mom's station wagon. Yeah, you want to talk about being a chick magnet. That was me in high school. So you probably remember these two. There's actually, it's 8-track, but there's 2 tracks for stereo, so it's actually 4 tracks on here. There's a button you could do to jump ahead a track. You couldn't go right to an individual song. And invariably, your favorite song on the album would be the one where the track had to change. Do you remember that? So the music would die down, and you hear this big ka-chunk as it went down, but it was a continuous loop, so that was kind of cool. Now, right about this same time, the cassette players were also coming out. Much smaller, more portable. Not the original ones were a problem because when you would get to the end of it, one side, you'd have to take the cassette out and stick it back in. And then somebody figured out, well, we could just reverse the motors in the cassette player, so you could leave it in there and the tape would just go back and forth and it would still work effectively. So there's this big battle between 8-track tape and cassettes, and one of the things that helped out was the portability of it, because of course then what came out was the Walkman, right? So now for the first time I can actually put a cassette player right into this, and I could walk around. I could sit here and clip this onto my belt, right? I was thinking about the other day maybe going to the gym with this bad boy clipped onto my belt. What do you think? You know, get those really ugly foam headphones too, you know, and plug in there. And so that was pretty exciting because we could do that. So then what came along? That was through the 1960s, 1980s, CDs. So what the CD did is for the first time it switched from an analog signal onto a digital signal and made this, and this was a great innovation, right? It's much smaller than an LP. Originally some of the ones that were in cars had a problem when you get a bump, it would skip, but over time they came up with some dampening technology and some buffering and did some things that took care of that. But every step along the way, the record industry embraced every one of these innovations. Right? They thought innovation was fantastic. We think this is great. Every time some new medium comes along, we want you guys to embrace this too. And why is that? Because now you're going to rush out and you're going to rebuy all those albums. Right? Because what are the chances you're going to sit there and try to transfer your records onto an 8-track tape or a cassette tape? There are ways to do it, but it never really turned out so great. But so CDs, every one of these was simply an enabling innovation. It wasn't that disruptive, it was enabling. It just allowed the same thing to happen in a slightly more efficient way. Music industry made one little mistake with this though, because it's binary. It's not analog. So what does that mean? That means your computer treats the files on here like any other file on the computer. Which means for the first time, I can easily grab files off of here, copy them, and give them out to my friends. Now, is that legal? No. Is it going to care? Do most teenagers care if that's legal or not? If it's easy, and I can go get an album for free compared to paying $12 for it? Many of them are going to go ahead and do that. But while it was just hand copying or burning onto disk, the disc players were fairly expensive at the time, wasn't that big of a threat. Until 2001. So a gentleman created a company called Napster. Now that the internet started becoming ubiquitous and started getting everybody's home, if you installed Napster, a free program on your computer, it essentially turned your computer into a server. Any song you had on your computer would be made available to anybody else that had Napster installed on their computer. It's called peer-to-peer networking. It also is a huge hole to allow viruses to be inserted on your computer. So if you have anything like this, be very, very careful on your computer. So I can go into Napster and say, I'm really interested in this song. It does a search and it finds anybody else on Napster that has that on their computer. I say, okay, thank you. I click on it. It's transferred from your computer onto my computer. Simple, no mess, horribly illegal, but so what did the music industry do, right? They started fighting back. Now how did they fight back? Filed massive lawsuits against the consumers of their material. They filed multi-million-dollar lawsuits against teenagers. Now, did they have the law on their side? For the most part, probably. People were violating copyrights. They were breaking the law. But here's a little business tip. Now, I'm not a business major, I don't teach business, but those of you that do, if you want to endear yourself to your user community, do you think filing multi-million-dollar lawsuits against your customers is a really good idea? But the music industry saw the writing on the walls. They saw their profits start to plummet simply because it was so easy to steal music. So what happens? Some of you have all heard of this guy named Steve Jobs comes along, creates this thing called the iPod. And for the first time, gives us, it wasn't the first digital music player, but it was the first one that was just really, really easy to use. And he worked out a deal with the music industry. He said, you guys are done. You're over. But I can save you. If you license your material to me, I'm going to sell individual songs, not albums, so people can just buy the songs they want for 99 cents. Because we have to get the price low enough that it's attractive to do the right thing. And I'm going to take a third of that, and I'll give you guys 2/3. Right? Somehow, he got them to go along with that, and that's what happened. So the iPod was born, the iTunes Store came shortly thereafter, and again, made it really, really easy to do the right thing. And he has completely and utterly transformed the music industry. This was a disruptive innovation. This was not incremental. This was not something that let people go on comfortably in the way things had been done for 50 to 75 years. This was an entirely disruptive technology. Last year, they served their 16th billionth song. 66% of all online music sales now goes through the iTunes Store. Apple gets 1/3 of every one of those sales. Is it any wonder that in the news this week they said Apple is now the most highly valued company in the history of the world? They know what they're doing with this stuff, and it's really made a significant change. So that's the music industry, okay? So that might be mildly interesting, but we're educators, we're academics in this room. So why does that matter to us? Why should that be something we should be paying attention here when you've got all these other problems going on that we're all struggling with? We've got increased demand, we've got lowered budgets, we've got all these things. Why should we be talking about the music industry here at the dawn of a new semester at College of the Desert? What's our track record in higher education for adapting to change? Maybe a little mixed, right? You know, some of us just want to say, you know, it's been this way as long as I've been going to college, so why should it ever change, right? Exactly what the music industry executives were saying. This is a guy I got an opportunity to hear. His name is Gary Pamela. He's one of these management consultants, writes books, goes around to all the Fortune 100 companies. And I was at a conference, and I heard him speak, and he said a couple things that I think are worth noting. He said organizations don't miss the future because it's unpredictable, but because it's unpalatable. The music industry should have seen coming the tsunami that was coming at them. It was entirely predictable. It's not that they couldn't see it was coming, they just didn't want to acknowledge that this is what was going to happen. This is from his book called The Future of Management. Every business is successful until it isn't. If you think about it, it's really simple, but it's absolutely true. It's true for the music industry. Is it also true for higher education? We've just been wildly successful, especially the community colleges. Our mandate was not completion. Our mandate was access, right? And we did an absolutely phenomenal job at that. We opened wide our doors. We will pick, you know, my boss likes to say, we're a very exclusive institution. We take the top 100% of all the applicants that come to our colleges, right? We were wildly successful. Our mandate is now changing. It's no longer access because they're not giving us enough money to provide the services to everybody. So things are changing for us. Denial follows a familiar pattern. Technology. Denial follows a familiar pattern. Disquieting developments are at first dismissed as implausible or inconsequential, then rationalized away as aberrant or irremediable, then grudgingly mitigated through the defensive action, and then finally, though not always, honestly confronted. This was his assessment. He studied a number of industries, a number of businesses that went through really transformative change. And there were 4 phases that he saw as a predictable pattern that each of them would go through. Initially dismissive. That's what the record industry did, right? It's kind of like, nobody's going to listen to music on those tinny computer speakers, right? They're not really a threat to us. And then you rationalize, well, of course we can't compete. It's free. They're stealing, right? And so then what do? We mitigate. In their cases, their mitigation was through litigation, right? Let's just sue them. That'll stop it. That'll keep them from doing that, right? And then finally, self-confrontation. Self-confrontation that was triggered by somebody outside of their industry coming in and essentially forcing them to go through that confrontation. So why is this important? Are we talking about the music industry or higher education on this slide? Centralized control, lack of individualized consumption, inflexible, rising costs, and an increased perception of a low return on investment. That's what happened in the music industry. I personally believe that's what's happening with higher education today in this country. Look at these cost curves. That red line is the college education inflation rate from 1985 through 2010. The overall consumer price index is that black line well below. How can we sustain this? Now this is higher education overall. Obviously community colleges are very much at the low end of this. And so we don't have to worry quite as much about things becoming a problem for us on the cost side. But how can we continue as an industry, as a sector of higher education, how can we continue to justify the kinds of expenses? I have 2 kids in college. I understand this. One of my kids goes to a Cal State, 40% increase over the last 5 years. We're getting the exact same level of service we did 5 years ago. So how can they justify continuing to raise these kinds of costs? The for-profit challenge. These first 2 bars represent the average yearly growth in enrollment. The first one is public sector, the middle one is private nonprofit, the last one is the for-profits, the Nationals, the Waldens, places like that. A 12% increase from 1977 to 2005. So where are we? We at the dismissal stage? Well, the quality of education at one of those the private sector universities, it's just not the same as ours. It's not the same quality. That may absolutely be true. But are we not facing some really serious facts by just trying to dismiss that? And then we rationalize, well, of course we can't compete. Look how much money they have. Look at what they're charging. They have budgets that are way higher than ours. We can't compete with that. How about mitigating? Did you see last year, the year before, the heads of a bunch of for-profit higher education institutions were brought before Congress and all lined up and grilled mercilessly? Now, were there some probably good reasons that they were asked some pretty tough questions, some pretty shady things going on with the financial aid? But are we doing the same thing the music industry is doing? Saying, yeah, go get them, go get them, because we don't like what they're doing because it's a threat. It's a threat to the way we do business. So let's go after them. Is it time maybe for us to do that self-confrontation before it's forced upon us? So why is this important? I'll tell you why it's important to me. These are my kids. That's my son Kevin on the left. He just started his sophomore year at Cal State Channel Islands. My daughter Kayla on the right, and she has had a rather mixed academic record that you'll hear more about in just a second. She has now returned to college, which we're very excited about. A couple of things I think are really evident in this picture. 2 things, actually. Number 1, I obviously married up in the looks department, right? And that's pretty obvious. These are not do not look like the children of a geek. My wife is actually in the audience today, and I was sworn that I would not point her out to anybody because she hates that kind of attention. But look around, maybe you'll figure out who she is. Second point that I think we can all be in 100% agreement on is Kevin needs a haircut. Right? I think we're all in agreement on that. A few years ago, I had a really uncomfortable conversation with my daughter. She had gone to San Francisco State, went there for a couple of years, did okay, didn't really find a major that really clicked with her, so she came back home. And she came downstairs once and she said, you know what, Dad, I'm just done with college. I'm just not going to go. And as someone who works in higher education, as someone who thinks education is really important, getting a degree is really important, that was a really tough conversation. So of course I was going to point out to her the error of her ways and step through in a very logical and methodical way and convince her to do otherwise, because that always works with teenagers, right? And so we just kind of stepped through the process, and I started bringing out all these arguments on why it was important to go to college, and how important it was to get that degree, expanding your mind, doing all these things time after time after time. And she kept saying, I don't care about that. I just want to pursue my passion. I can go back and get a degree later. You know, just going on and on. Finally, I got to the point where I just pulled out the big guns. I said, okay, it's not about getting a degree. It's about the acquisition of knowledge. It's about becoming a lifelong learner. It's about expanding your mind in ways that you're not going to get elsewhere. Right? And then I just sat back and I thought, that was good. You know, she's not going to have anything to come back on that one. So I was all ready for her to say, of course, Dad, I'm wrong, you're right. I'm going to hear that one of these days. Instead, she said, you know what? I absolutely agree with you. But you know what? I don't need college to do that. She's right. With the materials this generation of students has out there now, a motivated person can pretty much get anything they want out there when it comes to knowledge. So what have we become? A check mark? Is that what we all aspire to be? Right? That we just are that check mark that they're going to need on their resume to get a good job. Is that what we want to dedicate our life to be? Is simply to be a roadblock that slows them down rather than speeds them up and encourages them and gets them moving? And that's what my argument wound up becoming. Was you got to get that degree, you got to get that thing on the resume, which I still think is a good, valid argument. But we're going to see that maybe those things are changing. But I can guarantee you this: if what you're doing in your classrooms is what I'm about to show you, then I think that's all that we are.
In 1930, the Republicans controlled House of Representatives in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? Great Depression, passed the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smith tariff act, which anyone raised or lowered, raised the tariff in an effort to collect more revenue to the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
We laugh, but we've all been there, right? We've been the ones standing up, doing what we think is the very best job we can, and we look out at a sea of glazed eyes, right? Or we've been in the audience listening to somebody drone on endlessly, just waiting for that thing to be done. This I can pretty much guarantee you. If this is all you're offering your students, is just showing up, punching the clock, waiting for retirement, just droning out lecture after lecture with no passion or excitement or energy or vitality, they're going to look elsewhere. And they're going to be able to find it because things are really, really radically changing. The open course initiatives, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, putting all their course content out there for free. Some of our programmers, we got them working on a mobile app for our colleges. And so I was talking to a company that we were working with, and I said, I want to get our programmers trained on how to develop for mobile applications. What's the best training? And they said, oh, just go out to iTunes University. Stanford taught a class. It was taught by 2 tenured Stanford professors and an engineer from Apple that actually worked on the iPhone. Can we compete with that kind of quality content? Are we going to get somebody from Apple to come in here and teach one of our classes? Maybe in some cases we can. But if what we're looking at is just the content, then they're going to find that content elsewhere. A lot of you have heard about Khan Academy. Most of you probably watch a lot of the TED videos. Those aren't structured around courses. Khan is starting to move in that direction. But there's some phenomenal content out there that they can go to get the exact same experience that they're going to get in your classroom if you're just standing up there droning out a lecture. So what's the future of higher education? Based on what I'm seeing in these various industries, here's a few things I would say. It's going to be more personalized. It's going to be more interactive, much more participatory, much more student-centered, and certainly much more mobile. Everything's moving toward the mobile devices. I was looking through our logs the other day. We just passed 10% of all of the hits coming into our servers is now coming from mobile devices. And these are hitting sites that are not mobile enhanced. They're not enabled for mobile yet. Students are just doing it on their phone because that's what they're used to doing. That's another important trend we're going to have to watch out to. So what's going on with the future of higher education? Is somebody else going to come along and do to us what Steve Jobs did to the music industry? Notice I say not for us, but to us. Here's one person that I think has a rather intriguing idea. And see if you think this might be a threat.
I find that education, I think it don't matter where you go to school. Italy, America, Brazil, it's all the same. It's all just memorization. And it don't matter how long you can remember anything, just so you can parrot it back for the test. And I got this idea for a school I would like to start. Something called the 5-minute university. And the idea is that in 5 minutes, you learn what the average college graduate remembers 5 years after he or she with a cost of like $20. That might seem like a lot of money, $20 just for 5 minutes. But that's for like a tuition, capital gown rental, graduation picture, snacks, everything included. Not like in college, you have to take foreign language. Well, at the 5-minute university, you can have your choice. Any language you want, you can take it. Say if you want to take Spanish, what I teach you is, ¿Cómo está usted? That means, how are you? And the answer is muy bien, means very well. And believe me, if you took 2 years of college Spanish, 5 years after I was so in my school, that's all they learn. You see, you don't have to waste your time with conjugation, vocabulary, all that junk. Just forget it anyway, then what's the difference? Economics, supply, and demand. That's it. Business is you buy something and you sell it for more. Well, after the courses are all over, then it's time for a little Easter vacation. No time to go to Fort Lauderdale. Only lasts like 20 seconds. But what I do for you, I like to turn on the sun lamp. You know, I give you a little glass of orange juice. That's the snack part, orange juice. And then after vacation, you know, after you swallow it real quick, then it's a time for the final exams. I say to you, ¿Cómo está usted? You say, muy bien. Where is God? The God is everywhere. Economics, supply and demand. Then I put on your cap and gown. I get out to my Polaroid camera. Make a little snap a flash picture for you. I give you the picture. You give me $20. I give you a diploma. And you're a college graduate. Ready to go. I'm not too sure, but I'm pretty sure, right next door to the 5-minute university, I'm going to open up a little law school. You know, you got another minute?
I hope this isn't our future. But is it going to take somebody to come along and really rethink the whole model and the type of model that this new technology might be able to support and push out there? What about this? A lot of you may have heard about digital badges, right? That comes from the idea of being in the Boy Scouts. And if you were in the Boy Scouts and you could show that you had a specific skill, you got a badge for it. So you have the fire making skill, the CPR skill, the mountaineering skill, things like that. Some people are saying that maybe the whole idea, and I think the idea behind that is content used to be our shield, right? You needed us out there because we had the content. Well, guess what? That's not true anymore. The content is out there, and really, really high quality content. Now, in some cases, can you do a better job? Absolutely. But are the students going to necessarily know that? So that the content argument is gone. So now we've got to step back. So what do we have? The credentialing. we're the only ones that can provide you that checkbox. So you still need to come to us to be able to move forward with your goals. The idea of digital badges is it takes the whole idea of a degree and breaks it down into much more specific areas. And if you think about it, the whole course and Carnegie unit and certificates and degrees is in some sense artificial, right? There's a body of knowledge that any of you in your discipline knows. And again, I'm not belittling it. We needed to come up with a system. So we came up with a system of courses that have Carnegie units associated with them. And then you have to compile a certain number of those into a degree, and that degree signals something to other people about you, that you've acquired a body of knowledge. Well, are there other ways to represent that? And that's happening now with these things called digital badges. Now, as an employer, I can tell you that this is really, really attractive to me. When we hire a computer programmer in my department, we absolutely require a bachelor's degree. We don't hire anybody without one. But I asked some of our managers the other day, why do we do that? Nobody really knew. It's just part of the job description. Now, obviously, having a degree indicates that somebody can set a goal and go through a series of complicated steps to try to achieve that goal. So that's all good. But does that degree really tell me that that person is going to be a really good computer programmer? Not so much. I can tell you that based on experience. I've had people who work for me that had a master's degree from USC in computer science. They weren't very good. I had another guy that only had a high school diploma, and he was a fantastic programmer. So it has mixed results as an indicator to an employer. It can still tell me some things. They're going to understand the basic terminology. We're going to speak the same language. But does it tell me that based on completing some courses, they can sit down in a cubicle and for 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day crank out really, really good, reliable code? It doesn't tell me that. A digital badge might be able to do that and show me on a much more granular level. So if there's a specific type of person I'm looking for, maybe a collection of their badges that have been certified through some kind of an outside agency. So it's not just them saying, trust me, I did this stuff. So if I can acquire all this knowledge through these free online services, the Khan Academy, MIT, Stanford, Harvard, if I can watch those videos, take those online courses, do all those kinds of things, and then have some kind of an outside certifying agency show me or show you that I'm certified in those areas, is that going to be really attractive to me as an employer? Absolutely. Does that have the potential to completely replace the whole idea of an associate's degree or a certificate? We'll see. We'll see. Right now, it certainly doesn't have the same cachet that a degree or certificate does. But is that just a matter of time until people start? So what's happening now is organizations are starting to spring up to do this very thing. Straighter Line, they're working with the makers of SAT. edX, it used to be MITx, and now Harvard has joined them. And so Harvard and MIT have joined together in something called edX that is taking these free online resources and compiling them together into a form of curriculum that I think could be a really interesting thread. Udacity is, for instance, Stanford professors and Coursera, 16 major universities are coming together and doing this type of thing. This type of thing is absolutely happening. So is it time for us to do a little self-confrontation? Are there some questions that we should be asking ourselves so that we remain relevant and doing the kind of job that our students deserve? Here's some questions I came up with. I'm sure you can think of your own. In the classroom, what can we offer them that they can't get anywhere else? Are we truly helping them to learn? How can we personalize their experience and still maintain quality and standards? How is the classroom different today than it was 25 years ago? Or 50 years? Or 100? We have whiteboards instead of chalkboards. We have PowerPoint instead of overhead slides. But is what is going on in the classroom really that different than it was before? And is the content relevant to what they really need? Are we teaching them what they need or what we want to teach? For those of you in student services, do our services adapt to the student? Or do we expect the student to adapt to our services? Are we available to them when they need it the most? Evenings and weekends, for example. Do our services treat every student the same way? And are they focused on specifically on student success? And are we evaluating ourselves based on meeting their needs? In general, are we listening to them? Are we building our class schedule to benefit the students? Or are we teaching classes when it's most convenient for us? Here's one, obviously one that's a little personal for me. How are we leveraging technology to try to meet the demands we've got in a time when our resources are being minimized all the time? And are we making a difference? And that leads to the last question I've got for you, one for everybody in this room. Have you lost your passion? So easy. You know, one of the things that's a real problem with this technology is for a lot of the students, it builds up this entitlement mentality. It's really annoying, you know. I see it when I talk to folks from student services. I see it when I talk to people who have to deal with these students in their classrooms. It can get really annoying. And that can start to wear on them a bit. Do you remember the professor who ignited that passion in you? Do you remember the time that you were sitting in a classroom and you thought, I could do this? Do you remember the professors that made a difference in your life? I can remember some of mine, and I'm telling you, it wasn't the content. It was what your president was talking about earlier. It was the ones who recognized me as an individual. It was the ones who stopped me walking down the hall and asked me how I was doing, asked me if I needed any extra help on that assignment. I can remember one professor, in fact, my senior year, my wife and I got married while I was in college. And my senior year, I was working nights at UPS, and I was a computer science major, and we had a senior project. It was a small group. There were like about 10 of us that were going to build a system together. And we had to meet with an advisor once a week. The only time he could meet was Fridays at 7 a.m. I got off work around 2 to 3 in the morning. So I'd get home, get a shower, get a few hours of sleep, and I'd show up for the 7 a.m. class. As you can imagine, I was pretty worn out. And one day I was sitting there and I was doing this thing, right? And it's like, they know. How could they not know that we know, right? They go like this and they try to cover their eye, right? So you can't see that their eyes are closed. But I kind of went and did one of these things. And I woke up and he was looking right at me. And then I thought, oh. So we went through the rest of the class, and he says, okay, you're dismissed. And he said, Jim, I want you to stick around for a minute. I'm like, oh, busted, right? I'm going to get chewed out. So everybody else left, and he said, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing okay. And he said, well, you fell asleep in class. I've had you for some other classes, and you're a pretty good student, so what's going on? You okay? And so I explained, I work nights, I'm married, we've got bills, I've got to do this. This is the only time you could meet. And he's like, well, I'm really concerned you're burning the candle at both ends. That's not healthy. So tell you what, anytime you need some extra sleep, just skip the class. Let me know, come to my office, and I'll sit down and I'll work out those details for you. Do you think I was motivated to work really hard in that guy's class? Here's somebody who saw me as an individual, who took the time to find out what was going on in my life, and was willing to make some adaptations, some reasonable adaptations for what was going on. And I never once needed to do that. I never fell asleep in his class again. But I came to that class with so much more energy. I was so much more involved. Here's a guy who really cared. And you know what? People like me can replace what you do in the classroom. With the kind of technology we have, with the free resources that are available, like I said, if you're just cranking out some lectures, we can replace you. I can't write software that provides empathy, that provides compassion, that understands how people tick, that motivates people, that encourages people, that brings a passion and an energy to a topic. I remember a geology teacher at the community college I went to that was so passionate about rocks. No offense to any geology professors in the room at this right time, but it was exciting to come to his lectures, except he was a spitter, so nobody wanted to sit in the front row, right? So everybody, that was, you usually don't want to sit in the front row, but in this guy's class, you really didn't want to sit in the front row. But I'm telling you, it was contagious. You could not help but get excited about this topic because he was so passionate about it. And I'm sure everyone in this room can remember a professor. That's the professor you can be this semester. Now, can you be that for every single student who comes through? Absolutely not. But can you be it for some of them? Can you become an advisor to a club? Are there some things you can do to bring a level of passion to what you do every day that they are not going to be able to find anywhere else, and that they're going to be excited to get to your class? If there's nothing else you get out of what I say today, please remember this slide. You know, one of the things I love about the job that I do, and I've had opportunities like anybody in IT does, to jump ship to other industries. During the .com boom, I had a guy approach me, gave me his business card, and said, I've got an opening at my company, and I'd really like you to come be our programming manager. I asked him what the salary was. It was about a 30% increase over what I was making at that time. I went home, I talked about it with my wife. I'm like, well, what do you think? She goes, is this what you want to do? It's dental insurance company. Again, no offense about anybody who sells dental insurance. But I had to ask myself, at the end of my career, do I want to look back and say, I helped sell dental insurance? Or do I want to work for an industry that changes people's lives? That's what we do. You may think you teach geology or physical education or chemistry, or you may think you work in financial aid, or you're a dean or an administrator. You change lives. College of the Desert changes people's lives. That's what we do. How many people at the end of their career get to look back and say they did that? This is not an academic idea for me. I don't just work in the community college system. I'm a product of the community college system. One last personal story, and then I'll let you go. When I was in high school, I was the classic underachiever, right? And I was so fed up with school. I was tired of it. I have 3 older brothers. They were brilliant, straight A's. I knew I could never compete, not that there's sibling rivalry in a family of 4 boys, of course. But I knew I could never compete on that level, so I just gave up. When I graduated from high school, I had no idea what I was going to do. All I knew was there was no way I was going to college. I was just done with school. My high school Sunday school teacher showed up. Nick Nicolau picked me up in his little red VW bug, drove me over to L.A. Pierce College, and said, if you don't know what you're going to do, you're going to go to college. And we sat down and looked through the class schedule. And I started to pick a class that wasn't transferable to CSU or UC. And he said, well, that's not transferable. I said, I don't care. He said, don't be stupid. You're 18. You have no idea what you're going to do with your life. Take classes that are going to transfer. My first semester I took 7 units, including welding. Because I was going to learn to weld, right? Another fantastic thing about community colleges, right? I can pick up practical skills along with that other stuff. For the first time in my life, I got into classrooms with people who ignited in me a love of learning that is still going strong to this day. And it completely, radically transformed my life. That's what we get to do. That's what our institutions do. That's what you guys get to do every single day in your classroom. You don't need fancy technology. The technology is going to be making some changes. We need to adapt to that. We need to be flexible. We need to do all that kind of stuff. But you can do that this semester in every one of your classes. If you ever start to wonder, by the way, the underachieving attitude was most exemplified in, when I was in high school, it was one of those career placement tests. The #1 recommendation that came out of that for me was to be an auto parts salesperson. True story. And again, nothing wrong with selling auto parts. We need people who sell auto parts. That was the #1 recommendation for me. Would my life be as fulfilling as it is today if that's the career path I had taken? That's the direction I was heading. So, if you ever doubt this, picture me in a Pet Boys uniform. That little badge that says Jim. And remember that you guys get to be the people who make that kind of transformative change in other people's lives. How lucky are we that we get to do that? I really appreciate your attention today. I hope you guys have an excellent day.